Good morning to the BNC Club. Good morning to Gina Buenfeld. Good morning to the Camden Art Center. We are very happy to welcome you this morning. And today we will offer you a virtual tour of the exhibition, The Botanical Mind at the Camden Art Center, which was co-curated by Gina Buenfeld, she's with us today, and the Camden Art Center director, Martin Clark. This exhibition brings together works by over 60 artists, surrealist, modernist, visionary, contemporary artists, but also indigenous and Amazonian, with a focus on the significance of the plant kingdom, its spirituality. We initially wanted to see this exhibition in real, I would say, in person, but we started to contact the Camden Art Center and you like in September or something like that, very early October, and we have planned this visit many times, and now we are happy to finally get to have a virtual tour of the exhibition with all the comments by the co-curator of the exhibition. And Gina, this is your platform now. Thank you so much again. And thank you also to Aristea Relou, who is with us today, who has helped organizing this webinar.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be able to talk about this exhibition, which unfortunately has now come down. So it was supposed to open about a year ago now, and when the pandemic originally, took hold here in the UK, we had to postpone the show, but we were able to open it, fortunately, in September last year. So it did actually have very good attendance, higher than usual, which was really surprising, given, all of the restrictions on people's movement. So hello everyone who's listening. It's really nice to be talking to you. It's a shame I can't see you, but hopefully we'll have an opportunity at some point in the building. So just a brief introduction to Camden Art Center. This is a view from outside into our garden. We're an art centre in the north of London, close to Hampstead, and we're situated in this beautiful Victorian building, which was originally a library. So we've got 3 beautiful gallery spaces, and our focus is really on kind of contemporary art emerging, or sort of mid to late career artists that have yet to have a major solo exhibition in London. But occasionally we have the opportunity to work on thematic group exhibitions, which is really, from my perspective, one of the most exciting parts of my job. So I'm just going to scroll through very quickly here while I'm talking some of the images from the Botanical Mind. But then I'm going to take you through sort of chapter by chapter as if we were walking through the building, to give you a sort of flavor of each of the different areas that we tried to explore in this exhibition. So as you mentioned in the introduction, it's a vast exhibition with more than 60 artists, and it spans 500 years. We've got old manuscripts and old botanical documents alongside contemporary artworks, new commissions, and as you can see in this image, works by indigenous Amazonian artists. And that was really the starting point for the exhibition for me. So I took a sabbatical, a short sabbatical, only 6 months from Camden about 3 years ago. And I went out to the Amazon rainforest on different occasions. Actually, I spent time in the Colombian, Peruvian and Brazilian areas of the Amazon rainforest. And my interest was really in the knowledge that indigenous peoples have about this life field that they're really involved in and embedded within. And in particular plants, of course. The Amazonian rainforest is an abundant source of vegetal life, and it's really the foundation of everything that it sort of sustains all other forms of life. So the thing that struck me, I spent some time with the Yawanawa people, and this is one of the artists from that community here. The thing that really struck me were these extraordinary geometries that they would paint either on their skin or create as artworks in beadwork, or on ceramics or on textiles. So this is some of the very typical kind of visual language that the Yawanawa use. And these patterns and designs for them are not just decorative. They actually relate to them the sort of intelligence within nature and the ways in which both animals and plants and the elements, actually, the wind, the water, the stars, the sun, the moon, they all have a kind of consciousness in a way. And these geometries are a kind of language. So if you think about the markings on the back of a serpent, a snake, they have these sort of abstract geometries which signal something to other animals. And likewise, plants, when they create flowers, they're creating a kind of signal to insects or birds to pollinate for them. So this is a kind of language or intelligence in nature that really started to fascinate me. This is a work by the Shipibo-Konibo people. This is a woven textile that has, again, this sort of sacred geometries, and they vary from each indigenous group. Not only in the Amazon, actually, if you think about like Navajo rugs that you see, you know, in many places now, they're quite ubiquitous, but these patterns, these designs, they're much more significant than just something decorative that you might put in a domestic setting. So for the Shipibo-Konibo people, these designs really relate for them to a sacred plant medicine, ayahuasca, which sits at the core of their cosmology. It's a plant which, when ingested and prepared with another plant, the chacruna leaf, it brings about a kind of attunement to a spiritual dimension. And then this leads to kind of revelations and healing, deep healing, actually. And these patterns for them relate to the hallucinations or the images, the visions that they see when they're working with this plant medicine. So these, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but these are the ideas that really started to intrigue me. You know, what is the function of these patterns? And then also for these people, these patterns also have a relationship to music. So they often play music to bring about this kind of healing that I just mentioned in the body. And, you know, then I started to think about in Europe, the ways in which we think about that relationship between music and mathematics or geometry. So in Europe, there was an idea called music of the spheres, which prevailed from antiquity right through until the scientific revolution. Pythagoras wrote about this and formalized the diatonic scale, which is what we now use in most Western music. So that was sort of mapping out this relationship between geometry, mathematics, and music. So these ideas really were the starting point of the exhibition. So although it is an exhibition that is focusing on plants and plant life, it's much more than that. It's about thinking about the ways in which plants have an intelligence and that they use music and pattern to communicate with a world that is more than just the plant kingdom, that involves humans, animals, and everything that exists, actually. So it's sort of, you know, it's a show which is unpicking some really deep philosophical and spiritual ideas. And when Martin and I started working on this together, what struck us was that there were so many artists through time, actually, that have been concerned with similar ideas. So, you know, we ended up with about 60 artists, but there were far more that we looked at and that we could have included. So the exhibition begins with a work by David Tudor called Rainforest. And I'm showing you here, slightly confusingly, an installation of this work at MoMA, but we actually just played the recording, so we didn't show the entire installation. So this was a work that David Tudor made originally in collaboration with Merce Cunningham and was inspired by the forests of the Pacific Northwest in America. And it's a kind of cacophony of sounds that are created with the objects that push this sound out. So he's used different objects that you can see here in a way as speakers. So they create their own reverberation, their own sort of acoustic sound. So this marks a threshold in the exhibition at the very beginning. And the first chapter that we arrive at is called The Cosmic Tree. So this is a motif which runs throughout the exhibition, and it really departs from some of the ideas that Carl Jung, the great psychoanalyst of the early 20th century, was thinking about. So many people know Jung as a psychoanalyst, as one of the sort of founders of the psychoanalytic movement, along with Freud. But he was also an artist and a mystic, and these things are not so well known. So these pictures that you can see on the left-hand side of this image come from a manuscript which Jung made, which is now called the Red Book. It was originally called the Liber Novus, but has now commonly become known as the Red Book. And it's filled with these illuminations, which for Jung really kind of symbolize and relate to the consciousness that we all have. The awareness of ourselves as subjects within a world. So these two pictures here, both painted by Jung himself, are mandala forms. And this again is a motif which runs throughout the exhibition. The mandala is a form which emerges in different religious and spiritual traditions globally, including in Christian art. If you think about some of the beautiful stained glass windows which open up like the petals of a flower, and mandalas in Tibetan Buddhism, but much more widely than that, also in Islamic designs and mosaics, etc. So this for Jung symbolized the individual as this central point around which a world then opens up. As I say, this is a motif which we'll explore again later on, and relates also to this idea that what emerges in the world around us is also within our minds. So we'll get to it a little bit later on, but some of these plants that have psychoactive effects also bring about these visions within the mind, which have their equivalences in the material world, particularly in the shapes of flowers and plants. So these are two more illustrations from Jung's Red Book, this time not showing the mandala form, but actually a tree in profile. So seeing the tree with its roots going down into the earth and growing up towards the heavens. And interestingly, both images also have mandala forms within the branches of the tree. So this image for Jung, again, was a kind of archetypal image which occurs throughout mythologies and cultures globally. And the tree in this sense represents the individual in a process of growth. So growing up from the shadow, from the past, if you like. If you think about the soil being a sort of repository for things which once lived, which now decay, but are the site of the origin of new life. So, plants, weeds, all sorts of, very primitive sort of early forms of plant life emerge from this soil to sort of go on this journey, this cyclical journey of regenerative growth up towards the heavens. So this is a really important idea. If you think about what plants do, they transmute energy from the sun, which is pure light, just pure light energy. They transmute that into matter. So through photosynthesis, they're creating their own bodies, which then provide food for us. They provide shelter. We use them to build houses. And they also create the atmosphere that we breathe. So in a way, you could think of plants as the origin of life on this planet. They've transferred energy from this solar, quite godlike entity of the sun into everything that we have that sustains life around us. And these images for Jung were often associated with the serpent as well. So if I just go back here on the left-hand side, you can see a serpent around the roots of this tree. And this is a motif which runs again throughout many cultures. If you think about the Garden of Eden, there are two trees associated with a serpent. And in Amazonian mythologies, this is something that I also discovered in my time in the Amazon. This is something, again, which occurs in the stories that they tell, and in a way, in the gods that they worship. So the jiboya, the anaconda snake, is actually a really sacred being for many of these indigenous groups in the Amazon. It's worshipped. And is often associated with the ayahuasca vine, this very sacred vine which brings about spiritual enlightenment. So in this painting by Delfina Munoz de Toro, who's an Argentinian artist but spends extensive periods of time in the Amazon rainforest, she considers herself an indigenous, an activist. She's really concerned with the sort of poetics and the way in which indigenous peoples in the Amazon understand the world around them through their cosmologies. So again, you can see the serpents woven around the roots of this tree and around the trunk of the tree going up towards the heavens. So this axis between the earthly realm and the celestial can also be thought of in spiritual terms. So the celestial is often where we look when we think about God, or where we think the spirits go when people die. And this again is a kind of motif which runs throughout the exhibition, the plant or the tree as an axis between these two realms, the worldly realm of material, and the terrestrial, and the celestial realm of the heavens. And again, just to illustrate this point, this related motif of the tree or plant and the serpent occurs in many different forms. So this is a 16th century botanical Ortus sanitatus, which again shows this sort of tree-like form with a serpent woven around it. And in this illustration, which relates to Norse mythology, you can see what is here called the Ash Yggdrasil. So in Norse mythology, there's a sacred tree, the Yggdrasil, around which all 9 realms of their cosmology exist. And the Yggdrasil is known within these mythologies as always being associated with the serpent. So again, you can see the serpent woven around the roots here, and a serpent eating its tail, spiraling around this mountain in the center. So the next part of the exhibition is called Origin Story, and in a way it just takes these ideas a little bit further. So thinking about why it is that plants and trees have always been associated with our mythologies, with our stories that we tell about ourselves to try and understand what human nature is and what our place in the universe is. So we didn't obviously have this work in the exhibition. That would have been too extraordinary, but I just wanted to show this to illustrate, because I'm sure most of you know this extraordinary painting by Botticelli, which illustrates the rites of spring through these classical figures from classical mythology. And here I'm showing an image which shows the leaves and the plants coming out of the mouth of one of these figures from mythology. So this idea of the kind of body, the human body becoming plant, occurs, in many different forms through classical mythology. Here we see the myth of Apollo and Daphne. She was turned into a laurel tree. And in another myth, Mira was turned into a tree as punishment for having committed incest with her father. And the baby that was the product of this incest was born then from the trunk of her tree, so out of her womb, and that child was Adonis. And this was a myth which one artist in the exhibition, Linda, who many of you might know, British artist, she's made this series of collages inspired by this myth of Mira. So I don't know if any of you have ever smelt myrrh when it's burnt. It's a kind of incense, it has this extraordinary aromatic quality. Though the sap which creates myrrh is thought to have been the tears that she wept after she was turned into a tree. So yeah, just to illustrate this sort of connection in many sort of spiritual traditions between the tree, the sun, which I mentioned earlier, the way in which trees transmute this solar energy into the world that we exist in. This is an Assyrian relief which shows a cosmic tree being worshipped by these deities. And then above the tree, you can see the solar god, Ashur, which is giving light and life through this tree. And in the exhibition, we showed a series of works which kind of touch on these ideas, including these two paintings by Forrest Bess. Forrest Bess was an American artist, sometimes referred to as an outsider artist, but he really was, in a sense, not an outsider artist. He had exhibitions in New York at Betty Parsons Gallery. But in these two works, you can see on the left-hand side a work called Sunrise, which shows, again, this sort of central axis going up towards the sun as the origin of life in a way. So sort of tree-like form. And on the right-hand side, a mandala-like form, again, this sort of opening out of something which could be a flower, could also be bunches of grapes or mushrooms. So these sort of very kind of vegetal forms. And interestingly, Forrest Bess was very informed by Jung's ideas. He actually wrote to Jung, and I think Jung wrote back to him as well, and was very inspired in particular by Jung's ideas about alchemy. So if you think about that process of transmuting light into matter, it's quite an alchemical idea. And for Jung, alchemy was very much associated with the transformation of the individual, of the self, the psychological and spiritual self. So this is an image of the ayahuasca vine, which I mentioned previously. It sort of coils upwards, as you can see, in these spiraling forms, a little bit like a serpent. And for indigenous peoples in the Amazon, it is always associated with the serpent. And it's understood to be the vine of light. So it brings these visions for people, even in the darkness or with their eyes closed, they see these visions. And just showing again these images, which for the Shipibo Conibo people relate to those visions, and in particular to this plant, ayahuasca. And I just wanted to show this in this section because whilst we might think of, the Garden of Eden as in a way like our origin story in Christian societies, for them, the ayahuasca vine and its association with the serpent also relates to their origin story. So these patterns that I'm showing here, for them, in their understanding, once interlaced everything that exists. It connected everything. So in a way, that's a similar idea to the paradisal Garden of Eden, where everything was perfect before we split into the duality of desire or aversion. And in this section, there are some paintings which touch on these ideas around the Garden of Eden and that story from the Book of Genesis. So some paintings by Alexander Tovborg, a wonderful Danish artist who painted these especially for the exhibition, reflecting on both Adam and Eve and the serpent in this Garden of Eden. And that motif has been picked up, of course, by many artists, including Hilma af Klint, who was in the exhibition. So on the left-hand side, you can see this, this image of a kind of mushroom-like form, which is opening out up into the heavens and has its roots going down through the earth. So this was a motif which Hilma af Klint explored in a series called the W series, and relates specifically to the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. And in my research, I was sort of looking back through Christian art a lot and thinking about the ways in which that story of the Garden of Eden has been understood. And I came upon this really extraordinary medieval psalter, which shows Christ amongst trees. You can see down here on the bottom right, there are two figures around a tree with a serpent coiling up, which one would assume is Adam and Eve. But you also see Christ preaching to his disciples amongst these really quite strange mushroom-like forms. And this has been written about by many thinkers who have put forward a theory that these are actually psychoactive mushrooms. Gordon Wasson wrote about this, Terence McKenna has written about it, that psychoactive plants have been associated with the development of spirituality and consciousness in human beings, going right back into our archaic past. And just touching on another motif which occurs right through Christian art, the tree of Jesse. So this is just one example, but it's really a kind of an idiom which occurs again and again throughout Christian art, which shows the descendants, Christ as he's descended from King David of Solomon, who lies at the bottom of this image. So it's using the image of a tree to show the kind of genealogy and the line of descent to Christ. And Hildegard of Bingen, who is a really important touchstone in the exhibition, in our thinking, she was a medieval mystic, an abbess. She was an early ecological thinker, really. She understood the planet as a living entity, with all of its living forms connected and reliant on each other. And she really saw the vegetal kingdom as very central to life and to spirituality. She had a term viriditas, which meant the greening of the earth. If you think about how if you leave any piece of soil exposed to light and water, it turns green. It starts to grow moss or lichen or early shoots of weeds. So it's this kind of greening of the earth, which is its aliveness, and it gives life to all of us as well. And she saw this as the kind of root of a healing practice. So she would use plants as medicines to bring about a kind of attunement between the planetary forces and the human body. And Hildegard of Bingen was what emerged to us when we started doing our research was that she'd inspired many of the contemporary artists that we were talking to. So Adam Chodsko made this work especially for the exhibition, which is based on Hildegard's botanical thinking. She wrote a book called Physica, in which it was a document of natural history in which she named different plants. And Adam made this algorithm working with computer programmers and situated a camera in the back garden, which was scanning the undergrowth for ciphers from this language that Hildegard wrote. And then these names were then being chanted. So Hildegard of Bingen also wrote choral music. It was some of the most popular choral music of the medieval period. And it's that music which Adam used to chant the names of these plants from the back garden at Camden Art Centre. So the next section of the exhibition, again, sort of just takes this idea on. So as I described this axis between the heavens and the earth, that could be understood as an axis mundi, which means world axis. And it's represented either in this mandala-like form, opening out around a central point. So you could think of that central point as the axis between the consciousness and a world. And I'm just showing some examples of other mandalas here. Or it could be thought of as an axis which goes upwards. So if you think about a church spire or a minaret or standing stones like many of which we have around the UK, they're all kind of in a way like pointing to the heavens. So they're marking this axis between our life on earth and what is beyond. So this area of the exhibition brings together many forms of the axis mundi. This is a world map, which is based on Jain thought from India. And it shows at the center, again, of this world, this map, which opens out in rivers and forests, a central point, which in Indian thought is Mount Mertu, this sacred axis which goes up towards the heavens. And we also were fortunate enough to show some very traditional Tibetan mandalas, which are thought of as being kind of mind maps. They're used for meditation. and again have these like flower-like forms, which relate also to the inner realm of the mind. And we discovered that many artists were intrigued also by this form of the mandala. Contemporary artists, 20th century artists that you wouldn't necessarily have associated with this type of imagery. So John McCracken, Scotty Wilson, an outsider artist, Matt Mullican, Terry Winters, Adolf Wolfley, another outsider artist, and Jordan Belson, who is a West Coast American artist, very associated with experimental film. This is a film still from one of his works, but he was often exploring these kind of images from within the mind, which have these mandala-like forms. And he made a film called Music of the Spheres, which I briefly mentioned earlier, this idea that there's a harmonic principle which connects everything from the planets, the movement of the sun, right down to the shapes and forms of plants, that they all share these kind of mathematical principles, which are harmonic and have a kind of musical principle. So we showed Music of the Spheres by Jordan Belson in the exhibition. This is an image from it here. So the next section of the exhibition, As Above, So Below, is a title that is taken from European alchemical thought, which is about these correspondences between the celestial realm and the material terrestrial realm. So I'm just going to show some images that illustrate this idea. If you look at these plant forms, these sort of spiraling geometries, these are also replicated in the shapes and formations of the planets. And they're also replicated in the animal kingdom. So we can see here on the bottom right, the spiraling form of a conch shell. So these reciprocities or sacred geometries, there's different ways of thinking about them. In a way, they're like an intelligence in nature. So again, going back to the very beginning of the exhibition, how I introduced it, in the Amazon rainforest, you know, these patterns are understood to be the way in which nature operates, the way in which nature communicates and expresses itself and perpetuates life. So these ideas were very popular and prevalent in Europe right through until the scientific revolution, when things became much more kind of rational and mechanistic. And these are some illustrations from Robert Flood's manuscripts, which again illustrate this idea on the left of a music of the spheres. So you can see this tuning instrument that is bringing into harmony the planets. And on the right-hand side, also Robert Flood, you can see this human figure at the center of this mandala-like form, opening out through the different realms of the mineral, the vegetal, the animal, and then to the celestial. So this illustrates the idea of microcosm and macrocosm. So the human body being a microcosm of everything that exists in the universe. So again, these two related ideas of music of the spheres, microcosm, macrocosm, point to a sense in which everything in the universe is part of a big, a kind of symphony, if you like, and we're each component parts which reflect each other. So going back to Hildegard of Bingen again, she was interested in these very same ideas. Here you can see the human figure at the center of a cosmological diagram. This idea of a kind of self-similarity between what's inside the body and what's in the universe was the root of Hildegard of Bingen's plant healing, and many other physicians in the medieval period were using this idea of kind of humors in the body, so sanguine or choleric, as sort of substances or juices in the body, which also have their counterparts in plants and in the planets and can be brought into a kind of harmonic relation. So this part of the exhibition shows different works that explore these ideas. On the left-hand side is again an Indian work. This is informed by both a kind of the Kundalini axis in the body, which again is represented sometimes by a serpent, which is spiraling upwards. But also ideas of Ayurveda, which many of you might know, which is a very ancient form of Indian medicine, which seeks to align balance between the doshas in the body, very similar idea to the humas that I just mentioned, and the sort of planetary or cosmic forces. That's a closer image of it. And again, from a 15th century botanical document, you can see this figure, which is kind of turning into a plant. So again, sort of just exploring these relationships between the human body and plant-like forms. The Voynich manuscript is a very mysterious document from the 15th century. It's written in a script which has never been decoded. And it's filled with these extraordinary images of cosmological diagrams and botanical illustrations, which make this connection between what's in the celestial realm and what's in the material or terrestrial realm. So in this image, you can see these mandala-like forms, which could be petals opening out on a flower, or they could be these sort of celestial arrangements of the planets or stars. And here you can see another page of this document. So we were lucky enough to show a version of this document in the exhibition. You can see these plant-like forms which are turning into animals, or animals turning into plants. And here these figures, these human figures that are moving through what looked like the kind of vascular networks of plants or elements of plants, seed pods or flowers. It's completely mysterious and no one really understands what it means. But what struck me was when I started to look at other works from that period. So Hieronymus Bosch, The Garden of Earthly Delights. There's a very similar kind of idea that comes through in that painting with these figures inside the sort of flower or seed pods of plants. And on the right-hand side, this work by Hilma af Klint, which we had in the exhibition, again shows this human figure with a kind of spirit form, but inside a kind of seed pod of some description. And, you know, many artists have explored these ideas of the human turning into a plant or the plant turning into a human. Minnie Evans was an outsider artist, African-American, working in the 20th century, who always worked with these wax crayons and created these extraordinary sort of vegetal landscapes which were animated with life. And in this section of the exhibition, there are many artists from the Surrealist period, including Eileen Agar, who's the two paintings on the far left and far right by Eileen Agar, which show, again, this kind of morphing of the human into the vegetal. And in a much more recent work by Das Institute, a series of slides shows these relationships between the vegetal, the human and animal, and the cosmic realm. So you can see here what looks like a kind of mineral form in the background, like a sort of formation of a stone, and then lily pads and the human body. And someone that really explored these ideas in a very beautiful way was Ernst Haeckel, who was a botanist, a zoologist, a polymath really from the 19th century, who created this catalogue called Art Forms in Nature, showing the extraordinary geometric forms which are shared across the mineral, the animal, and the vegetal kingdom. So on the right-hand side, this looks like it might be a kind of flower, but actually it's a jellyfish. On the left-hand side, we're looking at mushrooms. And then again, with this image, looks a bit like a flower, but it's actually a jellyfish form. So just bringing out this sense in which there's this harmony, this kind of musical harmony throughout all forms of life in the natural kingdom. And to illustrate this again, these, extraordinary geometries which we see in the mineral kingdom. So here as snowflakes, we actually see very similar things in the vegetal kingdom. So this is the fruit of what's commonly called like the cheese plant, Swiss cheese plant. So you can see these extraordinary geometric construction of these plants. So yeah, it's really thinking about geometries and these patterns in nature and what they tell us about who we are and the world that we live in. And another artist in this section of the exhibition, also working in the Surrealist period, experimented with this sort of intelligence in materials and in substances. So many artists from that period were using automatic techniques to allow the inherent intelligence in properties to express themselves, really, to be agents in the work. So Wolfgang Pahlin created his own technique called fumage, where he used a candle to kind of create these shapes and patterns on the canvas or on paper by kind of smoking the paper, if you like. I'll just skip through these because I think we're running out of time a little bit. But an artist who worked in a very similar way, Ithell Colquhoun, a British artist, Indian-born, lived and worked in both London and Cornwall, used an automatic technique, a kind of mantic technique, where she would pour paints and allow them to create these forms by pressing another sheet of paper over the top and sort of pressing them into these formations. So that was called decalcomania. And again, she was very interested in this idea of an axis mundi. So this is also another painting of hers showing this axis up through the earth from the terrestrial, opening out in a kind of flower-like form up in the heavens. And Kirsten Bratch, the last work from this section, which I'll show, again, was sort of collaborating with materials. So working with marbling techniques where different pigments were placed into a bed of liquid and allowed to create these forms, which could be on either end of the spectrum, really. You could imagine that that's something from the celestial realm, a kind of nebulae, or it could be something under the microscope. So we have 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for questions at the end. So I'll move quite quickly through the last three sections of the exhibition. As within, so without touches on the idea of plants as opening up this realm within our minds. So psychoactive plant medicines like ayahuasca, but also psilocybin, which is found in magic mushrooms, peyote, the sacred cactus in Central America, Mexico. These visions which people report when they're working with these plant medicines often have the form that we see in the plant kingdom. So these fractal or spiral geometries, which people associate with psychedelia, we also see in the plant kingdom physically. And, you know, many artists have been exploring these experiences. So Bruce Conner, who experimented with psychoactive plants and magic mushrooms, created this work, Psychedelicatessen Owner, where you can see these kind of psychedelic forms of plants. And in this section of the exhibition, there are many works by artists who are exploring this, including Henri Michaud. So on the far right, the early 20th century artist Henri Michaud, who took mescaline, and when he was under the influence of this, this psychoactive plant, made a series of drawings called the mescaline drawings, and this is one of them. So again, I'll actually move through these very quickly now because we're running out of time, but Bruce Conner was exploring these ideas and images from the plant kingdom that open out around symmetrical forms, but also have quite a psychedelic quality. And Joachim Koester, who photographed using an electron microscope, which gives an incredibly detailed image of the surface of different substances. He was showing different psychoactive plants. So here, cocaine, which is derived from the cocoa plant, and cannabis. So this is actually the very close-up detail of the cannabis plant. I think I'll just skip through these, but just to say that this section of the exhibition also showed many modernist artists and surrealist artists that were fascinated by these sacred geometries in Native America. So Annie Albers, Joseph Albers, Yves Leloy, all of whom were looking at these sacred geometries, which again relate to these visions often that occur with psychoactive plant medicines. So the next section of the exhibition, I'm just skipping through, is botanical mysticism. So this area of the exhibition really was looking at artists who've been inspired by the morphology of plants, the way in which they grow, the forms that they make, and brought that into their work. So Percy Smith was an early 20th century filmmaker, used stop motion animation to show the extraordinary growth patterns of plants, and really revealed in quite an uncanny way the way in which they're alive, and they very much have a spirit of their own. And many outsider artists or self-taught artists in the 20th and 21st century have been looking at these plant motifs and plant forms, often to explore kind of spiritual ideas. So Anna Haskell, a Czech artist. This is Philip Taff, a contemporary artist, looking at these shapes and patterns in plants. Josef Kotzayan in the center here, spiritualist artist. Karl Blossfeldt, who was really looking at these different spiraling forms. He was working in the context of Art Nouveau, which, you know, when you look at these extraordinarily kind of architectural forms, you can really see that those influences came from the plant kingdom. Anna Atkins, an early kind of proponent of the photographic movement, really. She created these cyanotypes by laying plant specimens or seaweed specimens onto a photosensitive paper and then allowing it to be exposed to the sunlight. And Anna Zemenkova, another Czech artist who was fascinated by plant forms and would get up early in the morning and create a plant portrait, sort of conveying the character and the sort of spiritual being of these plant forms. And again, you can see that they have this kind of musical quality, these motifs which repeat rhythmically. And then the last part of the exhibition, being sessile, really reflects on the nature, the ontology of plants, what makes them what they are, what makes them different to us. And the thing that, you know, we can notice the most perhaps is that they're rooted to one place, whereas we can move around. So we've called this being sessile, which means being rooted to one place. And it reflects on what plants do. So in the foreground of this image, you can see this suspended sculpture with these kind of tentacular forms. This is a work by Kerith Wyn Evans. It's a flute, it's actually an instrument. The box at the top is blowing air out through these flutes, so it's playing music all the time. And this really was interesting to us because we were thinking about the way in which plants breathe. You know, they inhale carbon dioxide and they exhale oxygen. This is another view of that gallery. We have a work by John McCracken in that space, again, reflecting on the idea of the plant or the tree as an axis mundi, like a standing stone, like Stonehenge going up towards the heavens. Andrea Butner, who made a work by bringing stones which had been covered in moss out in the natural world into the exhibition, where we then had to keep this moss alive through the process, through the course of the exhibition. And the work on the left here, Simon Ling, who spends a lot of time in deep concentration with plants, focusing on, their being and the way in which they are in the world. He made a painting outside Camden Art Centre. So he sat there for a series of days over the course of 2 months, painting this tree. And what really comes through is this kind of life force surging from within the tree. So just to finish by saying that we've also published a 230-page book. Just flicking through some of the pages from that book. It's unfortunately sold out now, but we're hoping to do an ebook version. And if any of you are interested in exploring these ideas further, the Botanical Mind online is a platform where a lot of the research that Martin and I undertook has been uploaded. So we also commission podcasts, there's film and audio work there, but it goes through the different chapters that I've talked through very quickly today. And yeah, I can give you a bit more information if you're interested. So I've overrun a little bit, I'm sorry, but I hope there's still some time for people to ask questions if they have any.
Thank you so much, Gina. It's been an amazing exhibition, and we're really sad that we could not see it because it's so complete. So my question, the first question is, how long have you been working on this exhibition? And I understand that you have been invited for a residency as a curator in Finland, in Helsinki, right? Is that where you've been working on all of this? Because it's like a big thesis of multiple sources of artists and centuries that you bring together in one theme.
Yeah, so it really started when I took that sabbatical, which I think was 2017 to 2018. And during that time, I did spend that period in residence in Helsinki, which was wonderful. That was immediately following the time that I had in the Amazon. So I was awarded a British Council and Arts Council scholarship to go out to the Amazon and spend time with an NGO called Tropenbos. So that's an NGO that's really concerned with indigenous knowledge and wisdom in the context of tropical rainforests. And they connected me with a wonderful artist, Abel Rodriguez. So that's really where it began. I had some time in Finland where I took the discoveries from the Amazon and started to think about them in the context of a European worldview. So whereas, in the Amazon, it's just a commonplace understanding that everything has spirit. It's a kind of animist worldview. I was really, started to think about why we don't think that way here, why we really separate matter and the physical world from any idea of the spirituality. And, then I started researching like the progression of science and how science led to this split, into a kind of very mechanistic worldview. But when I was in Finland, I had the chance to go up into Lapland, where there's a very strong, thriving indigenous culture, the Sami people, who, actually share many common perspectives with the people that I was spending time with in the Amazon. Not least, they have a shamanic practice. That sort of region that borders Russia is sometimes thought of as the cradle of shamanism. These ideas about there being a kind of life field, and it's sort of surging with a spiritual force, and the way in which patterns and sacred geometries relate to that understanding was something that, was really central to my research also with the Sami people. So it goes way back to that research. But then when I came back to Camden, that was the same time that Martin started as director there. And we struck up a conversation immediately about these ideas, and they resonated with a lot of Martin's thinking and exhibitions that he's curated in the past. And we just took it from there. So I would say from that point until we actually put the exhibition on, it was about 18 months, which is quite short to be applying for loans and developing, the exhibition and the shipping and everything. But we're a small team, so that in some ways gives us the opportunity to work quickly. We can be quite nimble and make decisions and move with things very quickly. So yeah, it's vast and it's a lot of research, but it's also been such a joy. So when you're passionate about something, it's easy in a way to throw yourself in.
Yes, of course. Yeah, you could have spent 5 years on that subject, I suppose, with a PhD or something.
Definitely.
With honors. And the other question would be, you just mentioned that the book, unfortunately, you don't have it anymore. It's sold out. And why did you decide to go totally digital and not to do a reprint of the book? And that's also very sad to hear that we cannot buy the book. I was about to go online and purchase it.
I know. Well, we've already done a reprint. So we printed the book, it sold out. Then we reprinted, and that has sold out again. And there is a lot of appetite, I think, for another reprint. But we talked about it internally, and it just felt that, you know, maybe it's time to just sort of close that chapter and make it available as an ebook. But yeah, it's been so popular that I think it's disappointing to not be able to still offer that. And yeah, I mean, the digital activity has been very interesting, actually. So the Botanical Mind Online was a platform which we launched at the very beginning of the first lockdown. So we were supposed to open the exhibition on the 22nd of April, and we couldn't because of the lockdown. So we launched this platform, and it's been really positive for us to see how far we can reach. You know, we constantly get feedback and comments from people all around the world, you know, saying how they've been moved by it and it really resonates with their thinking. So this kind of digital programming is something that I think will definitely take forward in the future. But the caveat to that, I would say, is that we've also learned through this process that it doesn't replace the exhibition experience. And when we could open the doors in September, you know, the overwhelming response was, you know, people just really wanted to come and visit. And, you know, we sold out tickets every day. It was sold out. So I think although it's very positive and we learned a lot from doing it, it doesn't replace the physical experience of being in a gallery with artworks and the kind of magic that happens in that format.
So that means that on the platform, it's not possible to download the book, for instance. Now you
not yet.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah. I hope so.
And you can purchase the download. You can. I mean, how is it? That's new, right?
Yeah, we actually haven't got it yet. We haven't. This is a very early idea that's where we're going to go rather than reprint. But we haven't explored it yet, so I don't know. I don't know when it will come or how.
We'll see. I hope you let us know.
We'll let you know. Yeah,
I can send the link around when it's ready. Yeah, I'll send it.
Yeah,
exactly. Thank you so much. Also, before we just wanted you to announce what's going to be the future program at the Camden Art Center that we would be able to visit in May. Your opening. Just a few words about your next exhibitions.
Sure. So we're really excited to be able to open the building again on the 21st of May. And we'll be showing two artists alongside each other, two solo shows. So Walter Price, who is an American artist based in New York, a painter. He's made a really wonderful series of new paintings and works on paper. He was actually an artist in residence with us last year or the year before. So we know Walter already, but he's a really wonderful painter, and it's going to be a beautiful show. And alongside him, Olga Belema, who's a Ukrainian American artist, also based in New York, coincidentally. So Olga's practice is a sculptural practice, and we've commissioned her to make a new work for our Gallery 3 space. So they're the next two shows, and they'll run through until the autumn.
All right, thank you. So Fantastic. We'll come and see you. And thank you so much again. Thank you for your time for this amazing exhibition. And luckily we have recorded everything, and we're going to put it on our platform so that it's available as well as a lecture for people that have missed and other people that want to listen. And we're going to diffuse largely through our website and newsletter. We have diffused the film of the exhibition through our newsletter, but that's good. We are going to do that again in the next newsletter, along with the recording of this fabulous webinar that we had the chance to do with you. Thank you again, Gina, Buenfeld, Merle, and Arista, and the Camden Art Center for your time and fantastic presentation of the exhibition. Have a great day. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.